Rolex is one of the most important luxury brands in the world, valued today at around $8 billion. Its history dates back a century ago and began with an orphan teenager whose challenge in he ran away for his hometown and moved to another country after a few years working his way. Other he decided to follow his passion, opened the watchmaking business. Modern writes that the challenge its whole industry and creating $1 billion empire. Hence, Hans Wildorf was born in Kambach, Germany on March 22, 1881 by parents Anna and Johann Danifs. Wildorf, he was the son of sons and child of fairly successful business that we passed down from his grandfather selling in goods, classifying them in the middle range class. Unfortunately, his mother got ill during the next few years and died in 1892. To make it odd, a year later his dad would pass away to live in hands orphan at the age of 12 new under the custody of his mother's brothers. His uncle immediately actually decided to sell his family's business and used some of the money for them education, putting all their of them in a nice prestigious in boarding in school called Kinsman Town in Town in Bavaria. In Bavaria, Germany has hated his disease early on and around become a depressed while living in the new town hence and since as an outside. And Hans was obliged by Opter's voice because of his religion to get through his difficult childhood. He decided to put his focus on school. As he got older, he understood that even truly even though he did not like the decisions of his become an important factor for his success. Our uncle were not indicators to for that the navigators his way in which they made me become self-reliant very early in life made me acquire the habit of lessons in affirm my passion in passion and looking back. I believe I believe the habit is to thus that most of my success in due Hans enjoyed reading books and become quite the bright student in school. The subject he most notable excellent in where matters in the language where he learned French and English. He was always curious about travel and knew that languages would be very useful, which would eventually play a big role in his during school. He became friends with the Swiss boy who would telling him story of his birthplace. In the does not ego in diffuse a city looked in Smith Zealand that we well know for his long history in the watchmaking industry and Hans become a very intelligent about the place to integrate it on his own. One day Hans and image of the way his life and leave the boarding school of Germany to move to go smile giant of the ego of is he himself a jewel as an prevention for an international exporting company. His company was buying parts from various market and would sort a grade and packages them for a sale to jewelry and noticed then company was not really creating anything because still making great profits there he improved in himself to learn their business teachers to strategies and was making good money for his ego. A day, a next day, Hans received a letter from his friend was officially him a job for a company called No in Corden Contents was one of the bright high quality watchmaking business at the time and was exporting about a million Swiss francs in wattens of package watcher in each year. They also produced some of their own watches from stitching with this. We'll know a company was based in all low so the formation the place he always wanted to go, even though the company we was already working at was more beneficially fund him is sanctions in curious for the village and the business around watches were strategies in strings. Therefore in 1900 he moved the lessons in fun to working for his companies. He was hired as an English cares bounded and the clique thanks to his ability to write and read English. He went back to school and was getting paid with a monthly salary of 17 to $15 Swiss franc in France. He was also responsible for winding in handing to humble packaging, wanting to everywhere to packet what to for me the medical in instincts into a watchmaking and obtained a big deal of knowledge about how all type of watch produced in. However, his them there was out thought he had to go back to Germany and service in the army. After only 2 years ago, 2 years before, his service and 22 years old, he moved to London, England to work for another company of high quality watchmaking in Waters, where he was the responsible for a bigger role and who knew in charge of increasable their insult in during the 2 years he started me successful to to manage to find more client for the company and grow their sale over time. B then we watch the already thinkable about build business of the waters in the and was learning everything he could to further his knowledge into his features in business during 2 years. 2 years he also leads his future will Florence in France, May Croton in Crotally, and would get a married shortly after. After Will's draft and Davis and one day in the homemaking waiting in the out in sitting around outside when his much older brother in law Alfred journey in Germany Davis and the talked about little and planned for their future and told him to leave field he was the confident in which to open his own business of woods, but needed some capital already did have to the money and no has passes in fascinated hands was about watch the defeats to being very young he looked a chance on the Germany and told him he was going uh, to help in harm to his business in venture and was ready to invest his money the shook hands together and in 1905 they founded the Wills Draft was Davis Limited which would eventually because Rolex a few years later the purchase in up with a Swiss watches company called Germany in Innis, which was based in the Switzerland and started importing to movement from his Swiss country to England places. Them in was showcase. They also opened up office in Bind to Switzerland to favor his partnerships. There themselves also after they were specialized in the distribution of times pieces at after the roots even though Hans was a lover of the watches there are major than he found to unfavorable about the watch industry packet watching at the time rights actually were mostly owned by women as a jewelry and were looked down upon by some the reason being for not being will precious on the time. These watches were much smaller than packet watches as the const in causes was of the similar movement in the which would
All there is to show
regularly
for it
make
so
the
far
clock
is
either
Belazika's
go
booty.
for their
Rolex watches,
ceremony
designer
in the
shoes,
due
suits,
to
and
the
a Mercedes
small
4x4.
daily
This is a
detail
glimpse of the former
in the
postman's
moment.
secret
This is
luxury
the
lifestyle,
main
a world
reason
away
away
from the
to package
£500
watch
rusty
were
Fiat Punto
more
he used for work.
popular of the time and was that but for was he mostly found it incountable to use it was a little hazard for himself every them to sing the time especially when his hands were busy until then it was though to be almost impossible to create the perfect wristwatch that could the consistently so the
When the going
exact
got tough in the
time
city,
and
two
been
entrepreneurs got
invented
going.
today use
Enter Michael
my
and Nicholas, the
personal
Square Mile's
opinion
first
is that the
pawnbrokers,
package
saw a business
was
opportunity
will
in
almost
Bankers
completed
Lane.
disappear.
This is definitely an original.
And that,
It's all original set.
which watches will
Something like that would
replace
retail
them.
for,
The
I would imagine,
definitely
£18,000, something like that.
will
Platinum,
grown
yeah.
in 1914.
Their life savings have gone into their
predicted
company,
that
and
the
5 weeks after
sooner
launch, it's
of
clear the business plan's working.
later reached watches
Bankers have been
were
pawning their
going to
bonus
be the
booty
new
as their bonuses ran
new
out.
more for
These aren't the typical wares of the
everybody
high street
and
pawnbroker.
was
These aren't typical
fully
customers
committed to
either.
finding
Big city
Ah,
boys, big
away-
watches, big
away
cufflinks,
to
sharp
create
suits, you
the
can cut your finger on.
perfectly reached
In his
watch
small
for
office
it-
in the
for
heart
its
of the
is
city,
painted the
Michael says he
names,
believes the
uh,
time to be brave in
several
business
years.
is the time when
Traveling
others lack
to
courage.
various
It seems like quite a
places
brave thing to do,
in
really,
countries,
to open up
in
and
countries
right in the
all
middle of the
around
financial
Europe.
capital of the
And
world, I
we-
suppose you could call it, really.
country
We're offering
was the
alternative
making
financial
decisions
services
about
to the workers
the
at the banks.
small details.
Their
to
alternative
tell
service
the
means valuing the pawned items and lending money
watchmaking
against them.
during
So
to
far,
see.
their
Yes,
old-fashioned
he
trading
started
business
to
is
the
turning in old-fashioned
release
profits.
his
I think it
own
shows that the bonuses are drying up.
wristwatch
It
there
shows that
beginning
they've, I think the good
some
times
years
that
he
they've had
founded
have gone.
his company.
And I think the
One
luxury goods that they've
watches
gained from
after
that,
the
they're now
another
using
he was
to
the
see them through the bad times.
confederation round
And as the city
of
workers
the
hawk their luxury items, the
creatively
Square
in,
Mile has a new winner in the
creating a
pawnbroker.
better,
This
high
time it isn't the
quality
bankers who
and
are making a
reliable
profit on their spoils.
wristwatch for
Penny
the
Marshall, News at
men
10 in the
and
city.
women applying that
The robbers'
he,
target was
he
Chronex,
learned
the
that
luxury
from
watch store
other
in
watches
Piccadilly with
watches
£1 million
makes
worth
for
of
his
stock.
journey.
Detectives
So
had
soon
intelligence that
after
a gang
the
wanted to smash
company,
and
his
grab the
company
watches.
began to get
When police
some
knew the robbery was
some their
imminent, they
own,
ordered all
and
the
by
customers out of the
1908
shop.
it was
But the staff
one
had
of
to
the
wait here
top
and act
firms
as if they didn't know
watchmaking
anything.
in the industry.
The shop's manager spoke
in
to us
England.
but didn't want to be identified.
Rolex,
What was it like
Rolex by
waiting
now
for the robbery
Hans
to happen?
wanted to changes the name of his company to something high classes watches produced was cast to show to say he mattered he the language it was needed to be sought be the name good for the easily in the dial of the watches he spent a king deal of the time combining five lifting from the alphabet to beat finally the Rolex was the Braun. His immediately knew it was the perfect was and one or the few days learns the registered the Rolex name of the trademark for the Wheatstone and the Dokes Limited in 1908. During the next few years, Rolex was become around for his high quality wristwatch, and many rich people were already starting to use it, but it did not take long after when the first World War book out and many business included watches firms were the Sterling's in stretching to say it business was Rolex. These strategies in event only made Hans company mainly firms in because of is already reliable which watches many sold in were given Rolex watches included for the packet watchings because it was most everywhere to suspect those it was helped them to better to credible in their elect to because of its predictable one it's by the time the two company had grown to such extent that they were the employing 60 people 600 people does not mind only 60 people in 1940 and the had big open officer spaces in the loan to feel further they are incredible to the Rolex and had already on the first even wristwatch it was the terminals to nothing for the Switzerland, followed by a class, a certificate of precious from loans. The observationally thus the made the brands more they start watches for people to buy, but the everything was sunshine and the rainbows for the hands is 1940 the British appealed 30 tax 33 tax for all companies registered in the Great Britain that were exporting goods across international to to borders. It became a big concern for Hans, so he moved his company headquarters. Avoid those taxes. Another reason for his movement was the because of the wood where the people from Britain began to dislike the Germany since the name Hans Wheels does not was the clearly Germany, and even those he registered Rolex before he was the still using the wheels does not, and the Davis name in England, which was the getting looked down upon his the always to also lead him to company suite his company a name from wheels dropped, and the Davis limited to the Rolex was a comparison to Rolex from to trademark logo, and the five steered to courage which became implemented for them. The onion the watches in 1919 the Rolex watch competition to move its main office from the Wim to Geneva to where it sells to still the stand to the day. From name now on the company focused on the manufacturing the watch movement in being and would transport them to given the wire to where they carefully verify the movements to such ever actually things them with their high class design and launching their produce its here in genius where was the wood was the wood alien with his aligned to things to the improve the techniques to innovation of the watches wristwatches we most success is make the watches easily so try that over moments will be the permanently to grounded in essentially and agents domains the cost be used the perforations to awards it announced to only them will the perfect accuracy of the Rolex watches is she secured thanks to his presence and the termination is eventually paid off and paid on the big time in 1926. Rolex realized this new model that would forever change the watches industry. The Rolex always the first every watches proof wristwatches in history. The new model sells with a very high tight process that provide an optional to profit to perfection for the small watches movement inside leading into be a watches proof hands to knew the was revolutionary and people would certainly certainly be interested in it, but he is decided to wait for the perfect affair to to meet it to present into the wood in variable creatively way. So the Germany mind of the making in 1927 has Hans heard about a woman from the London named to Gladys who claimed a, to be capable of the swimming across the English Channel in a 20.5 million bodies of the water that the especially England and France people did not believe her, so she was set to do it again into for the front of those land the of people every those the water temperature and was much good and the some temporarily to the opportunity and encouraged her there to wear a Rolex away to started watch around his the neck after the swimmings for over 100 minutes she was the pulled out from the waters after almost face to freezing to death to the ends on the ground in the back. It's about four fields of the way across the channel. The task was what the couple to success, but the Rolex against the come out of the water in the perfect good condition. People went crazy for the watch and hence follows the publicity putting on and the importance of the lawns. Dearly, the mainly newspaper related to the event. This is the point where Rolex rose to international firms of the revolutionary watch to the for there the happens Hans always marketed his Rolex of state inside of fish bowls with a real fishes in it on the sale display of the every Rolex dealerships to dealerships by the people to see when they worked by the genius strategies worked amazingly and the people become hooked on this the product by no decided to adhere this the hairless on Rolex. So in 1928 he worked with the top business model of the time heavily. Of casually there were the pictures of the hair wearing her wrist was the inside a fish bowls. The publicists in did not stop. The public did not stop there. In 1933, Rolex outside were the scene in the newspaper against the related to a flight over Mount Everest in which the crews, the memorables who were wearing their Rolex